I would just like to say thank you, big thanks to the Green Chemistry Foundation. I, as Nitesh noted, travel the world and do a lot in advocating for green chemistry. And what this group does is truly unique. I've never seen or encountered a group of people who have been so passionately committed to promoting green chemistry. And it's gratifying to see the results since 2009 about how green chemistry has really been expanding in India as a result of their efforts. So I'm going to have to go through my slides at a breakneck pace, and I apologize for that, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. Just several points about this slide, besides a shameless plug for the Institute. It's really the tagline, engaging you to reimagine chemistry and engineering for a sustainable future. Three parts to that. First is you. If you in this audience and many people around the world don't see yourselves as being part of the solutions to the grand challenges of sustainability, then we're in deep trouble. Because I'm going to point to the second part, which is chemistry and chemical engineering. There are no two professions that are more profoundly situated to make a true impact on these sustainability challenges than chemistry and chemical engineering. It's absolutely fundamental. If you look at the grand challenges, the goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, chemistry and chemical engineering underlies a majority of them. Finally, reimagining chemistry. Now, many people wonder why I would use a term like reimagine. It's not we're going to suddenly discover new laws of chemistry or physics. It's really based on the idea that the chemistry enterprise, as we currently practice it throughout the world, is completely and utterly unsustainable. Think about it for a moment. In terms of feedstocks, we're based in largely, almost completely in petrochemicals, right? Fossilized carbon, and in elements that are highly stressed, critical elements. The chemicals that we make, they either kill you fast or kill you slow, right? So we need to change the way in which we do chemistry so that we're not using chemistries or chemicals, making chemicals that create problems. The ways in which chemists do chemical transformations, the type of reagents that they use to affect, functionalization, CH activation, that kind of thing, they need to change. Because if we switch to a renewable feedstock, which is from nature, the difference in those molecules is rather profound from the molecules that you get in highly reduced form from petrochemicals. So the chemistries really do need to change, and that means educationally we need to change the way that we educate students. Finally, our processes also need to change. There's been some discussion or notes about efficiency. We have a long way to go, particularly in the batch chemical operating environment, to make our processes as efficient as a petrochemical operation. And finally, the products. This brings us into not only the use phase, but end-of-life considerations. So once again, the way that we're currently practicing is truly unsustainable, and we do need everyone here to work on making it more sustainable. One of the problems I find in chemistry and chemical engineering is that we're very good at asking questions, but my opinion is that many times we ask the wrong questions, and so we end up finding an answer to the wrong question. And so I would ask you to think about that. Each one of you has come into this room with a certain conception. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I usually spend a lot of time building this. I don't really have the time. But I like to give people some heads up about where I am coming from. This notion about plenty of resources versus finite and diminishing resources, I think that the world clearly is consuming resources at a rate which is completely unsustainable. I'm going to spend a little bit of time developing that in a few moments. Population, whether you like it or not, is driving the unsustainability of the world. And so population and population control needs to happen if we're going to really address some of the issues that we have. We have been operating throughout the world for many years as though the environment is an infinite sink for everything that we choose to put into it. And there are many signs that the environment is highly stressed. Ecosystem population crashes, so on and so forth. And we need to think about how we are using the environment and the services which it provides in a different way. And this last one is kind of interesting because most of us pretty much consider that life will continue pretty much as we know it. Yeah, there'll be changes. We're always highly optimistic that it will be changing for the better. But I would argue that there are signs where disruptive change is going to characterize our future rather dramatically. And you're beginning to see signs of that. And again, could talk for a long time about that. So for each one of these areas that I'm building here, they're both issues that the world faces, but they're also opportunities. And I, again, can't spend a lot of time talking about this, but energy markets, population, resource consumption, there are chemistry and chemical engineering opportunities as well as issues, problems that we face and that we need to solve in each one of these areas. And as I mentioned, this problem of resource depletion is a huge one. We're consuming at a rate that is much too rapid. And we need to figure out how we can become more energy and mass efficient in virtually every area of our lives. I wouldn't be a chemist if I didn't show a periodic table, right? And I apologize for the people that aren't chemists. Usually they go running and screaming from the room whenever you talk chemistry. But I think it's really important to just put a couple of concepts up here. It's a slightly different periodic table. Some of you have seen this before, but it really talks about the elemental sustainability, right? Can we continue to get these particular elements ad nauseum, right? So the center part there, the platinum group metals, they're the darlings of the catalysis community, right? So if you're a chemist and you're in catalysis, you're obviously using one of these metals. The problem is that these are extremely rare elements. Iridium has become a very much in vogue element. Where iridium comes from to the Earth is from outer space by way of meteorites. That's how rare it is. Where it is mined has been the site of things like the KT extinction event. A large meteorite hits the area of South Africa. That's where you find iridium, and that's where most of the platinum group metals come from. So once we deplete iridium from the surface of the Earth, we have a choice of either going into space or doing without it. So we need to think about how we can begin to move away from these platinum group metals to base metal catalysis or to biocatalysis, that kind of thing. The other area I would just point out is the area around indium, IN. That's highly beneficial to the electronics industry, all of those elements in that general region. You all are carrying indium around with you in your cell phones and in your computers. There's something like 4 to 17 years of known reserves of indium. And so if you start thinking about growing population, access to a smartphone, access to the internet is now considered to be a human right. And suddenly you say, how am I going to figure out and close the loop around indium before we deplete it, right? So this idea that I just referred to a few moments ago about disruptive change, elemental sustainability may promote disruptive change. It's something that we should think about. There's large challenges throughout the world in both infrastructure and societal organizational areas where we're talking about change, right? And I don't, again, have a lot of time to talk about this, but in-ground capital, the difficulty with bringing a new chemical entity to market, it's usually a 7 to 13-year odyssey. And it's real challenging in terms of the current way in which we value and do financial analysis. Chemistries are also a problem. Won't spend a lot of time with this, but basically chemists who are particularly organic chemists, but also inorganic chemists, who are creating new materials, they operate largely on precedent, right? You go into the literature, you discover what someone else has done, and you build on that, right? The problem with that is that the named reactions that organic chemists are taught are largely inefficient, largely unsustainable. They use highly toxic reagents. And once again, this is just a plea to say we need to think about how we change that, how we discover and use chemistries that are not going to be depleting the world. Think about some of the major Nobel Prizes in chemistry over the last 10 to 15 years. Things like the Suzuki couplings and Grobe catalysts and things like that. They're all based on platinum group metal catalysis, right? So we need to think about how we can move away and use different chemistries. Chemical technology, if you're a chemical engineer and you say, well, those chemists really don't know what they're doing, I would just point out some things about the way we use technology, right? Batch reactors have been around since the Bronze Age. Distillations came around when we wanted to get better gin or cheaper gin. And crystallization also from the Bronze Age. Yes, we use glass-lined stainless steel reactors and we have fancy alloys and that kind of thing. But fundamentally, we're doing batch chemistry the same way it's been done for a very long time. And so clearly, batch chemistry has to move towards more flow-type regimes. So it's great that during this conference, there's actually a segment that's going to be devoted to flow chemistry and that conversion. A number of you in the audience are really leading that charge, and it's something that's long overdue. Current batch process development is really complicated in specialty chemicals, in the pharma industry, fine chemicals industry. Large portfolios, multi-purpose chemical plants, significant route modifications, incremental optimization, and a focus on yield, quality, cost of goods. This is what you do on a routine basis. But I would say, is it enough? Is it sufficient for where we need to get to? And the chemical building blocks that we use them for good reasons, right? They're thermodynamically and kinetically favorable reactions, right? They happen quickly. There's a lot of reactions like click chemistry, using azides and aziridines and things like that. We use them because they're quote-unquote efficient chemistries. They also spontaneously explode. They have to be handled very carefully. They're unsafe to use. So we need to think again about using, again, a different set of chemistries, chemicals, and processes to deliver the materials that we demand to make the products for society. Huge number of sustainability risks about these products, you know, from feedstocks, process efficiencies, there's missing data. Really high production volume chemicals, there's about 4,000 of them. We might have good data on a few thousand of those 4,000. There's probably 80 to 100,000 that are routinely used in commerce. We don't have data for a large number of those materials. And when we make new chemicals, it is very expensive to get the kind of information that we need on those chemicals to make good decisions about how they're used. So again, we've got some real challenges in the chemistry and chemistry enterprise. And the only way we're going to get through these challenges is really to start spending more time about design and thinking and developing tools that enable us to either computationally probe whether or not these molecules are safe, or we spend a lot more money thinking about testing these materials before we try and develop them. We need to build sustainability into the design as early as possible. We need to assess these things as early as possible, change the way that we do. And I know I spent most of my career, 27 years, in the chemical and pharmaceutical industries, a little bit of time in aerospace and defense. I understand what it takes to bring a product to market. And I know that there's this tremendous pressure to bring something to market very quickly. Sustainable design needs to happen very early in the process, and I also understand that there's a lot of attrition. A lot of things don't make it. Green chemistry really, I think, is largely misunderstood by the majority of the people. And most people say, well, it's really about hazard reduction and pollution prevention. It really is about innovation. It's really about designing new ways, new chemicals, and new chemistries. And it's something that I think is not emphasized enough about green chemistry. And innovation is absolutely essential. We have to innovate our way out of the problems that we have. I like to talk about these particular points that came out of a workshop the National Science Foundation had in 2012. And this applies to chemistry, not so much chemical engineering. The first one in particular, systems level thinking. This is something that chemists aren't taught. That is the idea that it isn't just what is happening in your flask, your round bottom flask in the laboratory or in your crucible that you're putting into the oven to make a new material. Things matter where you get them from, and it also matters about where they end up. And so you really, chemists need to start thinking about these things when they are making choices about the materials that they use to do their experiments or choose to do to make the compounds that they're making. In the US, fundamental research, particularly chemistry research, is king. In other words, if you want to be funded by National Institute of Health or National Science Foundation, you focus on chemistry for the sake of chemistry, not chemistry for the sake of people or society or for the betterment of the world, right? And it's an important distinction because green chemistry is largely based on bringing products to market which are safer, less hazardous, newer, higher functioning, more efficient, so on and so forth. And that is a problem for a majority of the academic research community. So that point in my mind in the US context is tremendously important one. I'm not going to get into green is not synonymous with sustainable. That's a talk all by itself. Many people place their faith in efficiency. And this is problematic for the reason of Jevons paradox. So I usually like to ask how many people have heard of Jevons paradox? Very few, usually. So Mr. Jevons was an economist who worked for the Coal Board in the mid-19th century in England. And he was trying to predict how long the coal would last that they were mining at that time to promote the Industrial Revolution, right? And the steam engine was a new innovation, relatively speaking, in the mid-1800s, and he thought that because that was a more efficient way of doing labor, that obviously you would use less coal. What happened? As steam engines proliferated, and as they became more efficient, more coal was used, right? And this is what's Jevons paradox. Whenever you make something more efficient, you use more of it. And it's also called the rebound effect or whatever it happens to be. The thing that we have to focus on is increased efficiency, conservation, this idea that we're using less mass and energy for a particular function or an effect that we're trying to make. If we don't do that, then efficiency by itself is only going to deliver greater consumption, right? And so that's something that a lot of people don't really think about. They just pursue efficiency for the sake of efficiency. It's not going to get us to a more sustainable world by itself. Sustainability research and education is multidisciplinary and collaborative. In the green chemistry community, collaboration has been a hallmark of green chemistry. In chemistry community, collaboration is not. It's very difficult for chemists typically to collaborate. The NSF has actually forced it in many cases in order to get grants. So sustainability absolutely requires this idea of multidisciplinarity and collaboration. We get different insights by bringing in people with a completely different set of skills to to help us understand the broader issues in chemistry and chemical engineering. So green chemistry really should be spurring innovation, and a number of speakers already have talked about the triple bottom line, so I'm not going to spend any time. The good news is that the market for greener chemicals is expanding, and I think that this is just only going to be escalating. This particular study, we've already exceeded 98.5 billion in green chemicals before 2020. It happened at about 2016, 2015. This is my personal list of sustainable chemistry opportunities. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time in this. A greater chemical diversity, I'm going to have a few slides later to talk about this, but basically, if you look at the framework molecules and the elements that we use, more in organic chemistry I'm speaking to, we are barely scratching the surface in terms of the chemical diversity that's available to us, right? We always reach for the same 120 molecules, framework molecules. Think about benzene, toluene, xylene. Think about aniline, the number of millions of tons of those materials that we make every year. They're the framework molecules, right? And even if you look at the biorefinery, there is a tendency for making those particular chemicals from bio-based and renewable materials. I think that's personally not a good direction to be going in because those chemicals have a lot of issues associated with them. But the point here is that we need to make use of the chemical diversity that's available in nature and not things that are just mimicking petrochemicals. Synthetic biology. One of the ironies to me is as an organic chemist, you gain an encyclopedic knowledge of named reactions. You don't do the same for an encyclopedic knowledge of mechanistic pathways from biological organisms. And yet, biological organisms exceed the kinds of chemical transformations that you have available to you in the named reactions that you've memorized. So I would argue that the future is really rooted in harnessing microorganisms and biological organisms in general and using them for synthetic chemistry, using it more mindfully. So this biologically derived molecules, the point I'm trying to make there is this petrochemical, highly reduced carbon. We talk about CH activation and functionalization of those molecules. Bio-based chemicals, molecules, they have already a lot of functionality to them, lots of oxygen, nitrogen, sulfur. We don't talk about defunctionalizing those or creating chemicals that harness those particular atoms in them without having to worry about defunctionalizing them. So again, it's a mind shift about how we can use those materials. Clearly, we need to do something about CO2, and so coming up with new low-energy direct conversion of CO2 to some chemical, larger than C1 or C2, methanol greater than C1. Sustainable production of hydrogen. I was saying to somebody the other day, I probably should put ammonia there as well. But think about it. Why hydrogen? This isn't hydrogen as a fuel, to power cars or whatever. It's hydrogen for chemicals. Why would I say that? It's because in order to do chemical upgrading, you need lots of hydrogen. And we do a lot of chemical upgrading already. Think about, fats and hydrogenating fats and oils and things of that nature. But we do it on a regular basis. Hydrogen in most organic talks is just suddenly appears in the diagram, and nobody thinks about where it comes from. It comes from methane, steam reforming of methane, better than 95% of it. And that obviously is not renewable. And so we need to figure out how we can get low cost, low energy production of hydrogen. And finally, this closing the materials loop, to most chemists, waste is not sexy, so they completely ignore it. And the notion that you are going to convert something that is a waste into something that's a useful material is not an area of active research. So we really, if we're thinking about sustainability, need to, again, change our mindset and move towards this closing the materials loop. It's absolutely essential. So again, chemical diversity. This is really the chemical space available to chemists, 10 to the 60. It's a large number, right? This is the number of molecules that is estimated to have been discovered to date, 10 to the 8th, right? So think about that. 10 to the 60 available, 10 to the 8th discovered. A little bit of a difference there. Number of molecules commercially available, 1.4, 10 to the 7th, so 14 million, right? Number of molecules that are on the radar because they are problematic, 80,000 to 100, so we're 10 to the 5, right? So is 10 to the 5 a little less than 10 to 60? I think so. So my point is that we're not using the chemical diversity that's available to us. Why not? I mean, this is really the challenge in my mind of sustainability and green chemistry, is that we need to really move away, again, from where we've been. These are the kinds of building blocks that we're going to be looking to in the future, not 95% of synthetic chemicals derived from petroleum. That needs to shift to 99+% are derived from bio-based and renewable feedstocks. These are the kinds of molecules, again, that we look to in the future as our building blocks. There's already a lot of chemical diversity in these molecules, and we generally don't know how to depolymerize or pull these things apart and use them. I don't want to be terribly negative the whole time, and I just want to talk about some success stories in green chemistry. So the Presidential Green Chemistry Challenge Awards, it's now the Green Chemistry Challenge Awards, thanks to our latest administration no longer wanting to be associated with it. That's another story. It's been going on for 20 years, and it has really been a showcase of innovation and in green chemistry, so synthetic pathways, reaction conditions, so on and so forth. I'm going to very quickly pass through these slides, but what we did is a study to look at all the awards over the past 20 years and tried to group them in ways which were meaningful to chemists and to answer some of the questions. So first of all, are many of the award winners using a renewable resource? No, although the trend is that it's increasing. 15% have some kind of biotechnology to achieve their innovations. So that's pretty astounding when you think that biotech has really only gotten its legs in the last 5 years, with the exception of specialty areas like pharma, which has been doing biotech for quite some time. We group these things in terms of creating a new chemical, using new chemistry or a process, and you can see that chemical and chemistry innovations account for most of the innovations. Many people say that green chemistry is the province of organic chemistry, and as an inorganic chemist or as a physical chemist, it really doesn't make sense, and that's nonsense. The awards, interestingly, have been spread liberally around different areas of chemistry. So the point is, green chemistry applies to virtually every kind of chemistry. It isn't just the province of one or two. Chemical innovations by type, again, this is just showing for a new chemical, very interesting. New chemical or new chemical product is largely inorganic in nature in the awards program. Process innovations, obviously in industry, are the most common, and organic chemistry is the basis for most of those innovations that are process-based. So very quickly, some award winners, large chemical companies, you know, recognize propylene oxide. The innovation really came in the hydrogen peroxide, the Solvay's advanced anthraquinone auto-oxidation process. I like to point this out that many people in green chemistry say hydrogen peroxide is a green reagent, and I would like to dispel that notion. It is one of the most non-green chemicals out there. Why do I say that? To make hydrogen peroxide is one of the most energy and mass-intensive or waste-intensive processes out there. It's horrible. So Solvay has done a great job at taking the anthraquinone process pretty much to its limit. but we need to find a better way to make hydrogen peroxide because it's critically important to the chemical industry. And in this particular award, they did a great job. You'll notice at the bottom the HPPO process there has dramatically reduced the amount of waste that was produced to make propylene oxide. So it's a huge innovation. It illustrates the idea that much of what we're talking about is incremental improvements, right? They're not step change improvements. They're usually incremental. I like to point out this one because it's a small business category winner. Number of things about this metathesis chemistry. So again, Nobel Prize winner in metathesis chemistry. The thing I like about this, it's feedstock independent, right? You can use a variety of bio-based and renewable feedstocks. You do the metathesis chemistry, and then it's a drop-in replacement. And you can address an extremely large market with the materials that you create. So you can use some interesting functionality, again, which isn't being used, and to get some of this functionality from petrochemicals is quite difficult, or it's actually a little less efficient than it is to get it from nature. And again, it's a drop-in replacement. So what's the Achilles heel in this metathesis chemistry? It's ruthenium. It uses, the Grobe catalyst uses ruthenium, and unfortunately, there are no heterogeneous ruthenium Grobe catalysts. So that means that all of it is wasted. There are a variety of companies. Mirion is just one of them. There's now about 4 or 5 that are making bio-based succinic acid. Companies like BASF, BioAmber, Succinity, so on and so forth. The thing I like about this is its replacement, potential replacement for adipic acid, which again is derived from petroleum. Lots of issues with doing that because people are reluctant to move from 1 carbon less to use succinic acid, but it basically can do the same thing. The other nice thing about it is it's a fermentation process. Again, feedstock independent, it just requires a sugar base, and it can be non-food based sugar, so things like sorghum rather than corn-based sugar. So I hope that in this whirlwind presentation, I've laid out some challenges, but I've also shown that there's a lot going on in green and sustainable chemistry, not just in the United States, but the rest of the world. I have been privileged to be here in India several times, over the last few years, and I think India is really beginning to take off, both in the academic community and in the industrial community. A lot more receptiveness to the idea that there's an environmental problem here that you just have to step outside to see, but India is clearly committed to doing something about it, and I think they've really embraced this idea of green chemistry. So I'm very excited to see that. I hope I've convinced you that chemistry and chemical engineering are absolutely pivotal. They're best suited communities to really making a difference. Green chemistry is more than just hazard and pollution reduction. It really is this idea about innovation, making new stuff, and stuff that, oh, by the way, doesn't have a tremendous number of hazards, and it isn't going to create a large amount of waste. Innovation is clearly key to what we need to do. Early design is critical, and there's many examples of success. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your kind attention and be happy to take any questions if we have time.